Welcome to EduTap and welcome to the Finance 360-degree session. In today's session, we are going to cover the annual report of the Ombudsman scheme. So this is going to be a very important session as the annual report that is released by the Reserve Bank of India is very important from the examination perspective. There are many of the terminologies that you will understand in this session, and your understanding of the Reserve Bank integrated ombudsman scheme will become even better after understanding the annual report of the RBI Ombudsman. Okay, so give me a thumbs up if I'm clearly audible and visible. And in today's session, we are going to have the clear understanding of the annual report of the Ombudsman. So the Ombudsman disposed of 95% of the complaints received in financial year 2024. So we will discuss that what are the complaints, from where the Ombudsman receives the complaint and so. Okay, so I hope I'm clearly audible and visible. So let's start with the session. Good morning everyone. Welcome to the session. Manish, Swapnil, Aditya, Neil. Good morning and welcome. Okay. So do subscribe to the YouTube channel of EduTap so that you continue getting these relevant videos, and join our Telegram channel, because in the Telegram channel you will get the PDF of the session, and the link for the Telegram channel is provided in the description box below. Okay, so let's get started with our reports. So the annual report of the Ombudsman scheme 2023-24 has been released by the Reserve Bank of India recently only. So here you can see that Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme 2021. So the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme was released in 2021, and now the annual report has been released for the 2023-24 financial year that started from April 1, 2023, and that was persisting till March 31st, 2024. So the annual report is for this timeline, that is for the financial year 2023-24, from April 1, 2023 to March 31st, 2024. Okay. Now the report has been released by the Reserve Bank of India, by the Consumer Education and Protection Department of the Reserve Bank of India. Okay. So which department has released this report? That is CEPD, that is Consumer Education and Protection Department. Now the annual report of the Ombudsman Scheme 2023-24 under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme of 2021 has been released. This provides the insight and information into the activities of the 24 offices of the RBI Ombudsman. Okay, so the report is providing the information regarding the activities or the complaints that have been addressed by the 24 offices of the RBI Ombudsman. Centralized Receipt and Processing Center, CRPC, is an integral part of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, because CRPC, through the CRPC that is present in Chandigarh, through the Centralized Receipt and Processing Center, there is a lot of complaints that are handled. Okay, we will discuss that how they are handled. Now contact center, we will discuss about the contact center also, because contact center is also under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. So basically the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, under its purview there is the RBI Ombudsman, there are the offices of RBI Ombudsman. So for that we will get the information, as well as there is the CRPC that receives the complaints, as well as the initial scrutiny is done by the CRPC, and then there is also the contact center that actually spreads the awareness and provides the information. So these come under the purview of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, and we are going to understand about their activities that they have done through this annual report of the Ombudsman Scheme. Okay, so I hope till now this is clear. Now coming to Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, so before moving ahead, let's have the brief understanding of the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme that is also mentioned in the annual report. So I have taken a complete session just last month. I have taken a complete session on the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, where we discussed about the scheme in detail. So the RBI, the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme 2021, it provides for cost-free addressal of the consumer complaints if they are not resolved satisfactorily by the regulated entities. So the regulated entities are the banks, NBFCs and such. If they are not addressing the complaints, if they are not resolving the complaints in the satisfactory manner within 30 days, then the customer can go to the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme and can go and send the complaint to the RBI Ombudsman. So this is the idea that first the regulated entities, the complaint has to be raised first with the regulated entities. If they are not resolving the complaints within 30 days in the satisfactory manner, then the complaint will go to the Reserve Bank Ombudsman. Okay? So this is the idea that the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme provides for cost-free addressal of the customer complaints if they are not resolved satisfactorily by the regulated entities within 30 days by the regulated entity. Okay? Now, the Reserve Bank of India Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, why it is integrated? Because it is consisting of the different ombudsman scheme. So the Banking Ombudsman Scheme that was launched in 1995, it was updated in 2006. Ombudsman Scheme for NBFCs, Ombudsman Scheme for Digital Transactions. All of these schemes were merged under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, and now instead of having so many of the different schemes for the complaint addressal, now we have the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. So all of these schemes were merged into one scheme, that is the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, and the RBI Ombudsman Scheme or the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme was launched from November 12th, 2021. Okay? So this is the idea. Now, which entities are under the purview of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme? So all the commercial banks, let it be the private banks, public banks, small finance banks, they all are under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme, as well as regional rural banks, scheduled primary urban cooperative banks, and the non-scheduled primary urban cooperative banks with deposit size of 50 crores and above. So all of these entities, they come under the purview of the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. The NBFCs, excluding housing finance companies, which are authorized to accept the deposits. So if they are accepting the deposits, they are connected to the public, so they also come under the purview of the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. Or if they have customer interface with an asset size of 100 crores and above, they also come under the purview of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. Payment system participants, that is providing the payment system, that are authorized to provide the payment system, and the credit information companies, they also come under the purview of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. So we have discussed about the brief idea of the Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. Now let's discuss about the report, that what the report has said about the complaints that have been received. Okay, so receipt and disposal of complaints under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme 2021 framework. So under the scheme, a total of 9,34,355 complaints were received at the offices of Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman and the CRPC between April 1, 2023 and March 31st, 2024. That is, in the financial year of 2023-24, there are 9,34,000 complaints that were received by the offices of the Ombudsman and the CRPC. Okay, this is an increase of 32.81% over the previous year. That is, as compared to the previous financial year, there is an increase that has happened in the complaints received by the offices of the Ombudsman and the CRPC, and 32% increase, 32.81% increase. That is a huge increase that we can see. Now, how the offices of the Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman, how they receive the complaints. So this is what you have to understand, that the offices receive the complaint. There is the CMS, that is the Complaint Management System portal of the Reserve Bank of India. This is the online portal of the RBI through which the complaint goes to the offices directly. Then there is the CRPC, that is the center in Chandigarh, that receives the complaint in the form of email, in the form of physical letter, and they receive the complaint in the form like from the CP grams also. Now CP grams, we will discuss about CP grams and CMS further, but CP grams, in the brief understanding, CP grams is the portal of the government through which the government can receive the complaints against the government entities. Okay, so CRPC also, because there are the public sector banks, government banks also, so CRPC receives the complaint from the CP grams also, that is the government portal for receiving the complaints. Okay, so this is the idea. So CRPC receives the complaint in the form of email, physical letter and CP grams. Now let's say that a complaint has come, that is a duplicate complaint. That is a duplicate complaint. That same complaint was released by the person or customer, and the customer has again sent the same complaint. So it is a duplicate complaint that is in the process of, like, the first complaint is in the process of resolving. Or let's say that the customer has not gone to the bank, has not gone to the NBFC, and has directly given the complaint to the ombudsman. So that is first resort complaint. First resort complaint. Now these complaints, will they be resolved by the offices of the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman? Now these complaints that are the duplicate complaints, because already the first complaint is in the processing. So duplicate complaint will not be seen by the offices, as well as the first resort complaints will also not seen by the offices, because first you have to send your complaint to the regulated entities, to the banks, to the NBFCs. If they are not answering your complaints, then only you can send your complaints to the ombudsman. So the first resort complaints, the duplicate complaints, such kind of complaints, so CRPC has the task of doing the initial scrutiny. So whatever complaints are received through the email, through the physical letter, through the CP grams, the initial scrutiny, the first scrutiny is done by the CRPC, by the center. Now if the center feels that this is the duplicate complaint, or this complaint is the first resort complaint, or this complaint is incomplete, if there is incomplete complaint, that is not understandable, or let's say there is a suggestion. Now if a suggestion or a feedback is coming through the through the customer, so that suggestion or feedback is not a complaint. So suggestions and feedbacks also do not go to the offices of ombudsman. Only complaints go to the offices of ombudsman. So in the initial scrutiny, so CRPC will always do the initial scrutiny, and after the initial scrutiny, whichever complaints are considered non-maintainable, so these are the non-maintainable complaints. They cannot be maintained or they cannot be answered by the offices. So such complaints are resolved by the CRPC itself. That are the non-maintainable complaints. So CRPC will answer the customers that your complaint is duplicate, or your complaint first should go to the regulated entity. So it is a first resort complaint that we cannot cater to. Your complaint is like, you are not sending a complaint, you are sending a suggestion, so we cannot accept that suggestion, because CRPC can only see, or the offices can only see the complaints, okay? Or like different reasons are there for non-maintainable, okay? So this is the idea. So initial scrutiny will be done by the CRPC, and after the initial scrutiny, let's say there are in total 1 lakh complaints received by CRPC. In the initial scrutiny, it was recognized that 80,000 complaints are actually non-maintainable. So how many complaints will go to the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman? How many complaints will go to the offices? Only 20,000 complaints. After the initial scrutiny, whatever the complaints are considered maintainable, only those complaints will be sent to the offices. Only those complaints will be sent to the offices of the ombudsman. Very good, Neil. Okay. So in the CMS, there is no scrutiny that happens. CMS, whatever complaints goes to the portal, those complaints go to the, or whatever is going to the CMS, whatever feedback, anything. So there is no scrutiny that is happening in CMS, and all the complaints directly go to the offices. Okay. So this is the idea. I hope this is very much clear, because for further understanding, you need to have the clarity that is provided here. Okay. So now basically it is said that the CRPC has received 6,40,000 complaints. Okay, that is handled by CRPC. So CRPC handled 6,40,000 complaints, and the offices handled 2,93,000 complaints. Now the offices of the ombudsman, now the offices of the RBI ombudsman, they are receiving the complaints either through the CMS portal or at the CRPC. So either the offices are receiving complaints from the CMS, or they are receiving the maintainable complaints from the CRPC, okay, or they are receiving the complaints from the CRPC after the initial scrutiny has happened, okay. So this is the idea. So in total, there are 9,34,355 complaints that were received in the year of 2023, in the financial year of 2023-24, and out of that, 68% complaints were resolved or were seen by the CRPC, were processed by the CRPC, and the rest of the complaints were processed by the offices. Okay, now here the thing that you need to remember is that the number provided, the CRPC, this number provided pertains only to number of complaints that were disposed or that were under processing under the CRPC. The complaints that the CRPC has sent to the offices after the initial scrutiny, so those complaints will be considered under the office's domain. Okay, so basically the number provided here pertains only to the number of complaints that were, so CRPC, in the case of CRPC, the number that is 6,40,000, this number pertains to only the complaints that is disposed directly by the CRPC or that is pending for processing at CRPC. The complaints that were assigned to offices of the Ombudsman or the CPC after the initial scrutiny, after the preliminary scrutiny, have not been included in the number to avoid the duplication. Because let's say again, then 1 lakh complaints were received by CRPC, out of which 80,000 is addressed by the CRPC. 80,000 is addressed by CRPC, so 20,000 is going to offices. Now if we include this 20k here also, and if we include this 20k in the CRPC also, because CRPC received it initially, so that will be duplication of the complaints, right? That will be duplication of number. So that's why in the CRPC we only include the number that is actually processed or under processing of the CRPC, and the CRPC complaints that is sent to the offices, that is like calculated under the offices only. Any confusion here? So this is the idea, that these are the complaints that are addressed by the CRPC or that are under processing with the CRPC. So that is the first resort complaints, or these complaints are addressed to other authorities, or let's say it is not a complaint, it is just a suggestion or feedback, or complaint pending or already dealt with at the offices. So this is a duplicated complaint. Service not within the regulatory purview of the Reserve Bank. Complete information is not provided, not represented properly. So such non-maintainable complaints are addressed by the CRPC in the initial scrutiny, and these are the complaints going to the CRPC or addressed by the CRPC. So here 6,40,000 means only those complaints addressed by the CRPC or under processing for the CRPC. Okay, clear? Going further, out of the total complaints received at the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman, so out of the total complaints received by the offices from the CMS or from the CRPC, 88.77% were received through the digital modes. That is, CRPC receives the complaint through email and through the CPgrams and CMS. Like the CMS is also online. Okay, so CRPC is receiving the complaint. The CRPC is receiving the complaint from email and from the CPgrams. So this is online. Online receival of the complaints. The CMS portal is also online portal. Okay, so 88.77% of the complaints were received through the digital methods, and rest of the 11.33%, this many of the complaints were received through the physical letters, because CRPC also receives the physical letter. Okay, so 88.77% of the complaints were received through digital modes by the offices, including on the online CMS portal, email and the CPgrams, that is under the CRPC. So complaints from the CMS portal were auto-allocated to the offices of the Ombudsman, while CRPC, after the initial scrutiny, assigned the actionable complaints, maintainable complaints or actionable complaints that were received through email, physical mode or CPgrams to the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman. So this is your CMS portal through which the offices receive the complaints directly. It is auto allocated to the offices. CMS is the complaint management system of the RBI. CPgrams is your centralized public grievance redress and monitoring system of the Government of India. So this is the CPgrams is the system of Government of India through which the government receives the complaint from the public for various government institutions. So this is the idea. Any confusion till now? Any confusion anyone has till now? Okay. So the offices receive the complaint through the CMS directly. Through the CRPC, after the initial scrutiny, the offices receive the complaint, okay, and CRPC is receiving the complaint through email, CPgrams and the physical mode, okay. No complaint, no query. Let's move forward then. Now, the share of complaints from individuals in the total complaints was the highest at 87.27%. So, out of the total complaints received, the highest were received from the individuals. That is 87.27% of the complaints were received from the individuals. So, this is the idea that the individuals, there were the highest number of complaints that were received. Next is complaint against the banks were the highest percent. So, complaint against the banks were 82.28%. So, the highest percent of the complaints were received against the banks. Then NBFCs, that is 14.53%, okay. So, complaints against banks were 82.28%, complaints against NBFCs were 14.53% of the total complaints that were received, okay. Loans and advances formed the largest category under which complaints were received. So, loans and advances were the largest of the category, 29%, nearly 29% of the complaints were received against the loans and advances. So, this is the idea. So, you do not have to remember the whole of the percentages, just remember the given points as they were given in the highlights and the main summary of the report. Now, coming to the next point, a total of 2,84,355 complaints were disposed by the offices of the Ombudsman during the year. Now, let me, you know that from the CMS, there is no initial scrutiny that is happening. All the complaints are directly going to the offices. So, do you think that there will be some non-maintainable complaints, there will be some duplicated complaints, there will be some first resort complaints? Is it possible? Because in the CMS, there is no initial scrutiny. So, the non-maintainable complaints can go from the CMS to offices. Can it happen? Yes or no? Offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman. Okay. Can it happen? Yes, it can happen because in the CMS, there is no initial scrutiny. As well as there can be some mistake that can happen from the CRPC, and maybe CRPC has done the initial scrutiny, but a few complaints are left out that were actually non-maintainable but sent to the offices. Okay, because CRPC did the initial scrutiny, but some mistakes can happen. Okay. So, actually, in totality, there were 2,84,000 complaints that went to the offices and they were disposed by the offices during the year, achieving a disposal rate of 95.10%. So, the percentages are very important. Okay, the increase in the complaints is by how much percent, as well as the disposal rate is how much percent. So, these percentages are important. Okay, the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman disposed 1,92,886 complaints, constituting 67.83% of the total complaints as maintainable complaints. So, out of the total complaints that were received, 67.83% of the complaints were maintainable complaints. So, let's say there were 100 complaints that were received, and out of that 67 or nearly 68% of the complaints were maintainable complaints for the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman. That means the rest of the complaints were non-maintainable. Okay, so this is the idea. So here you can understand that the offices have disposed of 2,84,000 complaints, that is the disposal rate of 95.10%, but out of the total complaints, the maintainable complaints were 67.83%, or out of the disposed complaints, 67.83% of the total complaints were maintainable, while remaining were disposed as non-maintainable complaints because they were the first resort complaints or complaint pending or already dealt by the offices. Complete information is not provided. Commercial judgment of the entity which is not taken because it is a judgment, suggestion, feedback is not taken. So this is the idea. So out of the 2,84,000 complaints, 1,92,000 were maintainable, while 91,000, nearly 91,000 were non-maintainable. Okay, non-maintainable, why? Because they were first resort complaints, suggestion, feedback, duplicate complaints, not providing the whole information or such. out of the maintainable complaints, 57.0 out of the maintainable, let's say maintainable complaints are 100. So out of the total maintainable complaints, 57% were resolved through the mutual settlement or agreement, while 40% of the maintainable complaints were rejected. Why is it so? So 40.78% of the maintainable complaints were rejected on account of absence of any deficiency of service, because it was recognized that actually the service is not in deficiency. Okay. So 57.7% of maintainable complaints were resolved through mutual settlement, conciliation or mediation between the customer and the bank, that okay, come together, or the bank will provide you the service now, you don't have to worry about it and such, while 40% or 41% of the maintainable complaints were rejected because the deficiency of service was not found. Okay, so this is the idea. I hope this is very much clear. Coming to the next part, during the year, 82 appeals were received by Appellate Authority against the decisions of the RBI Ombudsman. So RBI Ombudsman has taken a decision. Let's say RBI Ombudsman is saying that award has to be given to the customer. Now the bank is not happy with the decision because banks think that the bank has not done, or the NBFC has not done any mistake. So the appeal can be made against the decision of the Ombudsman. The appeal can be made from the Appellate Authority. So during the year, 82 appeals were received by the Appellate Authority against the decision of the RBI Ombudsman, out of which 72 appeals were received from the complainants, from the customers, while 10 appeals were received by the regulated entity. Okay, going further, now coming to the CRPC. So how many of the total complaints received by the CRPC? So till now, when we were discussing about the data for the CRPC, we said that 6,84,000 or whatever the number is, so that much complaints have been processed or disposed or under processing by the CRPC, under processing by the CRPC. Okay, so till now the number we have seen for the CRPC was the complaints that has been disposed of by the CRPC after the initial scrutiny or under processing of the CRPC. But now we will see the numbers particularly from the sense of the CRPC, that how many total complaints were received by CRPC. So CRPC witnessed a significant rise in complaints that were received by the CRPC. So here we are not talking about the disposed complaints, here we are not talking about the processing complaints. First we are talking about the total complaints received by the CRPC, that was 7,66,957 complaints in the financial year, okay, including assigned. So here we are talking about total complaints received by the CRPC, which was 30% higher as compared to the previous year. So it was 30.10% higher as compared to the previous year. Of these, 7,58,483 complaints were disposed at the CRPC. So that we are going to see. Okay. So here you can see CRPC has 7,67,541 complaints that CRPC received. Out of this, CRPC handled 6,31,876 complaints. Offices of the Ombudsman, they handled 1,14,740 complaints from the CRPC. Rest of the complaints were received from the CMS, and the CRPC also sent the complaints for the Consumer Education and Protection Cell. Okay, so CRPC received the complaints from the email, physical letter and CP-grams. So total complaints that were received were 7,67,541, out of which CRPC itself resolved 6,31,876, and under processing 9,058 complaints were under processing. Okay, till this annual report was made, so there were some complaints that were under processing. So CRPC disposed 6,31,000 complaints, and something 9,000 some complaints were under processing. Rest of the complaints from the CRPC, the complaints went to the offices, and from the CMS also the complaints went to the offices, and some complaints also went to the CEPC. Just the percentages. Yes, the percentages you have to remember that what was the increase in the complaints in the CRPC. See, the lakhs and such number you don't have to remember, just remember the percentages. So the number in lakhs, they are not very important, because usually like the total complaints, you can remember that it was higher than 9 lakh complaints that were disposed of, but usually the percentages are more important. Okay, so received during the period financial year 2023-24, so 7,66,957 complaints were received during this financial year 2023-24. Now from the previous year, because in the previous financial year of 2022-23 there were some complaints that were not resolved, that was 584. So we have added the complaints from the previous year also. So that was 7,67,541. In total, assigned to offices of Ombudsman, so 1,14,740 were assigned to the offices of Ombudsman. Some were assigned to the Consumer Education and Protection Cell. Some were, or the initial scrutiny was done by the CRPC. So CRPC in the initial scrutiny resolved 83% of the complaints. Okay, so the total complaints that were resolved were 7,58,483. That is 98.82% of the rate of disposal was there. So remember that when we discussed for the offices, when we discussed the data for the offices of the Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman, we were seeing the complaints that were received from the CMS and the CRPC, and the offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman resolved or had the disposal rate of how many percent? The offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman disposed the complaints and had the rate of 95.10%. While if we are talking about CRPC, that the total complaints received by the CRPC, first of all, it is 30% higher than the previous year, as well as if we are talking about the CRPC, the complaints from CRPC handled some of the complaints itself. Some of the complaints were sent to the offices. Some of the complaints were sent to the Consumer Education and Protection Cell. Okay, so through the like the complaints that were received by the CRPC, out of all the complaints, all these entities combined resolved 98%, 98.81%, 98.82% of the complaints. 98.82% of the complaints were resolved. I hope this is clear. I hope this is clear that offices of Reserve Bank of India Ombudsman received the complaints from the CRPC. 1 lakh some complaints were received from the CRPC, and CMS also sent the complaints from the for the offices. 95% was the disposal rate, while for the CRPC received huge number of complaints, more than 7,60,000, and the CRPC handled some complaints itself. 83, nearly 83% of the complaints were handled by CRPC itself, and then rest of the complaints were sent to the offices and the CEPC. So in total, the complaints that were handled were 98.82% from all the complaints received from by the CRPC. So this is the idea. Okay. So I hope this is clear. So of these, of total of 7,66,957, of these 7,58,483 complaints were disposed at CRPC by the different entities, CRPC offices and the CEPC combined. Okay. So this is the idea. Now coming to the next part, coming to the contact center. Okay. So the contact center with a toll-free facility provides information. So how many of you already know about the contact center? The contact center, it is a toll-free facility, or this is the facility that is provided. So there are some centers of the Reserve Bank of India. Through these centers, the RBI spreads the information, or if you have any query that how you can raise the complaint, how you can see where the process is going, or how many days will it take for your complaint to be addressed. So if you want to get the information regarding the complaint redressal process from the offices, so you can get the information through the contact center. So contact center with a toll-free facility provides information or clarification to the public regarding the mechanism at the Reserve Bank of India for the complaint addressal, guides complainants or the consumers in filing the complaints, as well as provides the status of complaints already filed with the Ombudsman. So a total of 7,19,694 calls were received at the contact center, while 57% calls were attended through the voice facility, through the AI facility, and 35% calls were attended by the personnel itself, by the people. So 57% of the calls were received by the voice facility, while the 35% of the complaints were received by the CC personnel. Okay, calls. 7% calls were abandoned. So 72.42% of the calls were received in Hindi. So a question can come that the highest number of calls or the highest percent of calls were received in Hindi, English, or which regional language? So it was Hindi. Okay. Then 19.47% of the calls were received in the 10 regional languages. So here, see, the journey of contact center is more important. First of all, operationalization of the contact center at RBI Chandigarh. The contact center started working in Chandigarh from November 2021. So when the integrated ombudsman scheme was launched, with the integrated ombudsman scheme, there was the launch of the CRPC, that is the Complaint Receipt and Processing Center, and there was the launch of the contact center for providing the information for catering to the confusion of the customers. Okay, so the contact center was operationalized at RBI Chandigarh. Now, January 2022, inclusion of Punjabi language. So different regional languages were included. Then there was the inclusion of Assamese language. November 2022, there was the extension of timeline for the contact center so that you can raise your queries at different times. Okay. Then January 2024, there was the decision that the additional contact centers will be launched because there were so many of the calls that were coming. So additional contact centers will be launched in Bhubaneswar and Kochi, and there was further extension of contact center timings. Okay, so this is the brief history. Now we are coming towards the end of the session. So other than this, we have discussed about the complaints. We have discussed that there were the offices that received the complaints. They they disposed 95% of the complaints. CRPC received more than 7 lakh of the complaints, and the CRPC with the other entities, it resolved 98.82% of the complaints. Now coming to the development that has happened, the other development during the financial year 2023-24. First of all, there was the master direction that was released for the Reserve Bank of India internal ombudsman for regulated entities. So we have discussed about the internal ombudsman. Okay, we have discussed about the integrated ombudsman scheme, as well as we have also discussed about the internal ombudsman scheme in our previous session. Okay, so do see that session, because from the internal ombudsman scheme, there was a direct question in the RBI Grade B 2024 examination. So in the RBI Grade B 2024 examination, there was a direct question from the internal ombudsman scheme. So I have taken a session on this complete session in the previous month. Okay, so this was the master action released by the RBI for the internal ombudsman for regulated entities. This was issued on December 29, 2023, and I have recently taken a session last month also on this. 2 additional contact centers were established at Bhubaneswar and Kochi, in addition to upgradation of the existing contact center at the Chandigarh to accommodate the surge in the call volume and to implement business continuity, that if something happens to Chandigarh contact center, if let's say there is the electricity mass out that happens, or there is some problem that comes in the Chandigarh contact center, so at least Bhubaneswar and Kochi contact centers will be able to handle the calls. So business continuity and disaster recovery capability. The report of the committee. So who remembers that who was the chairman of this committee? We have discussed this committee in length in a previous session. So there was the report of the committee for review of customer service standards in RBI regulated entities, set up by the RBI on May 23, 2022. And was placed in the public domain June 5, 2023. So recently also this was in news, and we have discussed this, that the report of the committee, for the review of customer service standards in RBI regulated entities. So the chairman of this committee was Sri P.P. Kanungo, former Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank of India. So there was the committee that was established. The report of the Committee for Review of Customer Service Standards in RBI regulated entities was set up by RBI in May, and its report was released in the public domain in June 2023 for the comments, and many of the recommendations have been accepted by the RBI from this committee. Okay. Next is awareness booklet. An awareness booklet, the Alert Family, was released as a sequel to earlier booklets Be Aware and the Raju and 40 Thieves. The third edition. So there is the Ombudsman Speak. This was the event that was conducted on March 15, 2024 on the occasion of the World Consumer Rights Day, in which under the RBI Ombudsman Speak, the RBI Ombudsman across the country interacted with the local TV, radio channels in their respective jurisdiction for providing the information and such, for spreading the awareness. RBI Ombudsman conducted 46 town hall meetings and 203 awareness programs. The focus of the programs was on specific target groups such as students, senior and the women. Okay, so these were the updates. Now way forward. So what is the way forward? So Consumer Education and Protection Department has identified the following goals for the future, for the coming financial year that is ongoing. Okay, so further improvement in the complaint management system. So in the CMS portal of the RBI, there is further improvement that should happen to enhance the support in lodging the complaints and to ensure the greater consistency in decisions and the outcome. Develop a consumer protection assessment matrix. So see, assessment matrix, it is a two-dimensional matrix that contains and summarizes what is being assessed and how it is being assessed. So there are different parameters that are laid down in the assessment matrix according to which the assessment should happen. So it is said by the RBI and the Consumer Education and Protection Department of RBI that we are developing a consumer protection assessment matrix for the regulated entities, according to which the consumer protection will be assessed by the regulated entity, for the regulated entity, that how much the regulated entity is protecting the consumer or working for the consumer. Strengthen the internal grievance redressal framework to encourage banks to take proactive measures to improve the customer service. So the internal grievance redressal should be strengthened. Just try to understand one thing. See what is happening, that the complaint conversion ratio is increasing. That means that the offices of the RBI Ombudsman are receiving more complaints from the customers. That means that the banks or the NBFCs, they are not able to resolve the complaints within their organization. So see, first of all, if you have any complaint, you will go to the bank or the NBFC or the regulated entity. If they are not resolving your complaint within 30 days or the complaint is not resolved in the satisfactory manner, then this customer will go to the offices of the Ombudsman to get the complaint addressed. So if the offices are receiving more of the complaints, that means that the banks or the regulated entities are not catering to the customer's complaint. So the complaint conversion ratio represents the proportion of the complaints received by the offices of the Ombudsman divided by against. So the complaint conversion ratio represents the proportion of complaints received against the bank at the offices of the Ombudsman to the total number of complaints received by the bank group. Okay, so this is the idea. So this is the complaint conversion ratio. This is the complaint conversion ratio, that is the complaint that is going to the offices of the Ombudsman divided by complaint that is going to the offices of the RBI Ombudsman divided by the total complaints that the bank group has received. So from the total complaints that the bank group has received, the bank group, let's say it is a public sector bank group or private sector bank group, so they are not catering to the complaints in a very good manner. That's why the complaints are going to the offices of RBI Ombudsman. And you can see that there is the increase in the complaint conversion ratio for the public sector banks. For the private sector banks, there is the increase in the complaint conversion ratio. That is, more of the complaints are going to the offices out of the total complaint against the bank group. There is the increase, there is massive increase in the complaint conversion ratio for the foreign banks, and there is the increase in the complaint conversion ratio for the small finance bank only, except only payment bank, because only in the payment bank case the complaint conversion ratio has actually decreased. But for all the other bank groups, there is increase that has happened in the complaint conversion ratio. So I will cater to your query at the end, Sabi. Okay. So complaint conversion ratio represents the proportion of complaints received against a bank against a bank group at the offices to the total number of complaints received by the bank from its customers. Okay, the increase in conversion rate indicates that there is a need to improve the internal grievance redressal mechanism of the banks and the entities, so that the customers do not need to approach the ombudsman. Because if the customers are going to the ombudsman and there is more customers or more complaints that are going to the ombudsman, that means the internal grievance redressal is not very good for the banks. And in the case of bank groups, for the majority of bank groups except payment bank, for the other bank groups, there is the increase in complaint conversion ratio, that is more of the complaints are going to the offices of the RBI ombudsman. Okay, so this is the idea. Next is conduct of survey to assess the reason for the low level of complaints in the rural. From the rural and semi-urban areas, there are low complaints. So why the low complaints are coming? Maybe they don't have the awareness, that's why. Okay, as well as in states with relatively lower number of complaints. So conduct survey to assess the reasons for the low level of complaints from these areas. Either they have low awareness or maybe they have better services, whatever the reason can be. Review and rollout of the oriented a nationwide intensive awareness program based on feedback received from the regulated entities and the ombudsman. Okay? So this is the idea. And the complaint conversion ratio represent the proportion of the complaint received by the offices of the ombudsman against a bank group divided by the total complaints that the bank group has received. Let's say the total complaints the private sector banks have received are 1000 complaints. Out of this, 100 complaints are going to the offices of the ombudsman, because these 100 people, they are not happy with the answer from the bank group, or they are not happy, or they did not get the answer itself. Okay, so there is the conversion ratio, complaint conversion ratio, that is increasing for private sector bank, public sector bank, foreign banks and small finance banks. That is not good, because the internal grievance system is not good in these bank groups. Okay, now coming to the first question. I hope you will be able to answer this question. So this is the first question, and these, see, I have noted down the percentages that are important in the questions. So these are the percentages that you need to remember. Even if you are not able to remember the lakhs and such number, at least remember the percentages. Okay, and this is the second question. I hope you will be able to answer this question. So this is the second question. Now anyone has any query, any question? RBI में एग्रीकल्चर से क्वेश्चंस आते हैं क्या? प्लीज टेल मी. सो इन द RBI द क्वेश्चंस कम फ्रॉम फाइनेंस बैकग्राउंड मोर. Okay, finance, RBI notification and such. Agriculture से no, not very much. Okay. Any confusion, anyone? So this is it. Remember the percentages as well as some like numbers you have to remember, such as the numbers, the total number of complaints. Like in the initial we have discussed that what are the total number of complaints. So 9,34,335. So this was the total number of complaints that were received under the Reserve Bank Integrated Ombudsman Scheme. So we have done the bifurcation of the offices of RBI Ombudsman or the CRPC, CMS, and such bifurcation has been done. But this is the total number. So this becomes important. Okay? So the total number, the percentages you have to remember. Do go through the PPT, because so many of the numbers you might have got confused, but do go through the PPT so that you have the clear understanding. Okay? Thank you so much, and do comment down below if you are liking the sessions, because yesterday I was seeing the comments and I don't know, like if you want to give any feedback also, give it nicely in a very respectful manner, because you want to become the RBI officer. So I don't expect you to be rude, I guess, or I don't expect the students to be mean. Okay, so even if you want to give any feedback, I will say that in whichever channel you are giving the feedback at, so give it very nicely, because you want to become the RBI officers and we see you at that position. And then if we get such rude or weird comments, so it makes us feel that okay, this student has to become humble first, has to work on his or her personality, so that they can become the officers now. So in whichever channel or for whichever faculty you are giving any comment, give it in a very respectful manner. Even if you are saying something negative, say it in a respectful manner, because that showcase your personality or that showcase your behavior. Okay, and you have to have that humbleness and the behavior of an officer to become the officer. Okay. Ritika, is this no, like this is important from the RBI perspective. For the NPS, just have the highlights of the report, not very important for NPS. Okay? From the SEBI and NPS perspective, just have the brief highlights, just have the few of the percentages. That's it. You are most welcome, everyone, and do tell me in the comment, like do give me the right answer of the homework question, and do tell me in the comment section below if you liked the session and if you were able to understand the things. If anything you are confused, so do tell me that also. Ma'am, it is not uploaded in the EduTap because it was released on 24th now, so it will take time for the team to make the whole of the report. Okay, so this will be uploaded, like there will be the time that will be provided to you, date will be provided to you. You will get this in the RBI News Tab document, the next RBI News Tab document. Okay, in the next RBI News Tab document, you will get this annual report of the Ombudsman. For now, you can study from the PPT